I'm currently at another hotel on my flight to Salt Lake City here today. I finished reading a memoir called Hereafter. It's written by Amy Lynn, and I cried on my flight because of this book. I'm looking up the book on Goodreads because I want to read the synopsis. Hereafter is an intimate story of deep love followed by dizzying loss. A stunning, taut memoir from debut author Amy Lynn is so finely etched and powerful that it will alter readers' hearts. When he dies, I fall out of time. Amy Lynn never expected to find a love like the one she shares with her husband, Kurtis, a gifted young architect who pulls her towards joy, adventure, and greater self-acceptance. But on a sweltering August morning, only a few months shy of the newlyweds' move to Vancouver, 32-year-old Kurtis heads out to run a half marathon with Amy's family. It is the last time she sees her husband alive. 10 days after this seismic loss, Amy is in the hospital, navigating her own shocking medical crisis and making life or death decisions about her treatment. What follows is a rich and unflinchingly honest accounting of her life with Kurtis, the vortex created by his death, and the ongoing struggle Amy faces as she attempts to understand her own experience in the context of commonly held truths about what the grieving process looks like. Hereafter is a love story and a meditation on the ways in which Kurtis's death shatters any set ideas Amy ever held about grief, strength, and memory. Its power will last with you long after the final page. And this synopsis is so well written. This book is just, it's such a tragedy to have, this was my, I can't even use words right now. It's 12, it's midnight, and our flight was delayed like 2 hours. My review was very short. I just said, incredibly written, I cried several times. The grief was so palpable and a beautiful image of the depth of love that can be had, and that love can be more than enough to the very end. I think I was so deeply moved by this book because of the love that Amy and Kurtis had for one another and the way that Amy writes about his love towards her. On a personal level, my friends have told me that I may or may not have intimacy issues, which is just a discussion for another time and not book review time. But yeah, look, so I basically have, it's hard for me to accept love and to acknowledge that I am being loved in various capacities. And it kind of felt like Amy was the same way, the author. Like the way that Kurtis would tell her and show her that he loves her, she would sometimes not deny his love, but like write it off as like whatever, because she didn't know how to fully accept it. There were just so many moments when one part of the book, she was talking to some friends and they were like, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. Like, I can't even begin to imagine, I can't even imagine the kind of like pain that you're in this grieving process. And Amy's like, you can't even imagine, you can't even try. You can't even try a little bit to understand how much pain I feel. And I feel like with the grieving process, especially with the death of a loved one, like an immediate, she is a widow now, your literal husband, to have someone this close to you that you loved so, so deeply lost to this world, that is a kind of grief that many people just haven't experienced. He was quite young when he passed, 33. I think a lot of people in that age range, they don't typically have partners that have passed away at that age. So it can be very challenging for people of that age range, your late 20s, early 30s, to understand the seismic pull and the gravity of losing your partner, your husband, the love of your life. So there's several chapters. There are 184 chapters, and each one is kind of written as a little vignette, which I personally really liked this format because it just kind of felt like I was reading a diary entry that she had on each particular day. She kind of jumps back and forth in timeline, and I kind of felt like I was in her head because kind of like Notes on Heartbreak, where the jumping back and forth in timeline actually makes for a stronger book because I feel like I'm following the grieving process and I'm in Amy's head as she's processing what's happening now, but also looking back on what was, and why she hurts so much now is because of the love that they had and how strong that was. and how he showed that to her in like the everyday actions. I honestly didn't highlight that many things, but I will read out some of my favorite ones. One of them is when she was talking about their wedding vows, the day that they got married. Part of her vows, she says, "Let time be tender towards us. Let the dishes sit in the sink. Let the radio play your favorite song. Let the moon pull the tides at will. And oh, let love be at the end, whatever that may be." And she says, "I worry we might divorce, not that he will die." Yeah, I feel like when you're in your 20s and 30s, like the average person doesn't really think about the possibility of their partner passing away. And that's part of what makes this grieving process so intense and hard for her. She also says that she went through grief counseling, I think like a couple months after, or like a month after he passed. Her grief counselor told her that the 5 stages of grief don't really apply when you're grieving over a lost loved one. That grieving process that like we hear so often of like acceptance and like denial, all that stuff, like that doesn't apply to the loss of a loved one apparently. And she was like, so what's the grief 5 stages of grief supposed to apply to? And then her grief therapist like didn't really know either. They're just like, oh, it's just like a study that was done. It's like, okay, thank you so much. And Amy was like, how is there so little research and understanding on something that like everybody experiences in their life at some point? Everybody experiences grief. Everyone experiences loss, unfortunately. How do we know so little about it? And how do we know so little about the coping process of it? But I think it all boils down to the fact that, you know, that grieving process is just different for everybody. And we all have different like methods of coping. Her therapist or her grief counselor also said that after the first 6 months is when you actually feel the most intense levels of grief. And she was like, where does that study come from? And her grief counselor was like, I actually don't know either. It's just something that we've noticed. And she's like, bruh, why is there so little knowledge about grief? Like, I don't understand. And I think like hearing her candidness and talking about how much she doesn't want to live anymore was also I just felt that grief and pain a lot from her writing. Just hearing her express time and time again to her therapist, to her grief counselor, to her family even, that she had no desire to live that much longer. I don't think I have the right word for it right now, but it was like hard to read about, to see someone talk so candidly about how little they valued their life, because if their life truly just felt like it wasn't worth living when you're not with the person that you love so deeply. She meets this other widow, like a young widow, and her name's Rebecca. So she gets to talk to Rebecca quite often, and they just, you know, confide in one another and just share how they're feeling, and are able to empathize and just see each other and the grief that they're holding. And it makes for a quite beautiful friendship, albeit it's very unfortunate circumstances. She talks about like the good signs that other people like equate to inner strength, and that like you're healing properly. And the signs are like getting a job, moving out on your own, going on solo hikes, planning a vacation, putting on makeup, brushing your hair, going on a date. And she says like Rebecca and I have each done some of these things. Yet neither of us goes a day without thinking life is not worth living. Neither of us knows how to continue without the people that chose us. I feel like I don't really have a lot to say about the quotes, but it's just like, they're just very like thought-provoking for me. And I just feel the intensity of the love that they have for their partners. And I think that's very touching to me, because I've never experienced love like that before. So to know that it exists as a hopeless romantic, and like to real people, like this is not a romance novel, you know, this isn't fiction. To know that that kind of love and that kind of intensity and devotion to somebody exists is very, I don't know what the word, I don't, it's not that it's like heartwarming. I don't know the right word for it, but like, I just feel very deeply. It just makes me feel very emotional. Later on, she's obviously a writer. A short story of hers gets published in a literary journal. So she receives a copy of it in the mail one day, and she says, when I received it, I hold it in my hands and cry. Kurtis would have left leapt around the apartment yelling. He would have bought a copy for every single person he knew. He would have stood beaming over their shoulders as they read it. I'm not going to do any of these things. It's not just because he's dead. I've never been the kind of person that can jump for joy. I want to, but I'm always too afraid. I need him to feel it for me, jump for me. I have a couple married couple friends, and I think they're all quite young in their marriage. It's all pretty new. I don't think I know any close friends that have been married for over a year now, but I think when I see these friends and I talk to them about their marriage and the hardships, but also, the good parts of marriage, because I've heard from all of them that, the first year of marriage can be very tough. I've just never experienced a kind of love where you feel that kind of intensity towards a person, and I fully believe in that we don't need somebody to make us whole kind of thinking. We are all whole individuals. So being in a relationship and being in a partnership with somebody doesn't mean that you are two halves of a whole, but you are just two whole beings. But I think sometimes when I read and I hear of how strong these relationships are, it almost scares me to know that this other person can mean so much to you and add so much life and so much color into my already existing world, because it's just something that I don't understand yet. I mentally cannot understand it because I've just never experienced it. So I think that's why these kind of memoirs and these these conversations really interest me. The way that Amy talks about these vignettes that she's written about Kurtis's love for her, and the way that he shows his love for her, it just touches something in my acts of service heart. She said, the first time I used the car wash after his death, I feel like my chest is caving in. Days before he died, he took my car and filled it with gas, only to be kind. When he brought my car home, he told me he had gifted me a car wash, had curled the long white receipt bearing the code for a luxury wash in my cup holder. Make sure to go soon, Baber, he said. He likes to call her Baber, like babe, but with an extra syllable at the end, which is also so wholesome. When I finally do go, he has been dead for months. As I exit the wash, the shout of the commercial dryer behind me, the sun is in my eyes. It is months before I can bear to clean my car again. This is one chapter, like that. Just the way that she writes about how heavy that grief is and how she holds it for so long, and that so many everyday moments remind her of him, is just so touching. It's just to get to read and to get to witness this kind of love, even if it's not my own and it's not somebody that I know personally, it's just so meaningful to know that it exists at all. Another chapter, she writes, we fight one night. It is a Friday. Mid-argument, I leave the apartment, slam the door behind me. I drive around the city until my breathing slows. He keeps calling me, but I will not answer. When I return to the apartment, he's not there. I sit on a couch and listen to one of the voicemails he has left on my phone. Hey, Baber, I'm worried about you. Please call me back. I do not call him. When he returns, I ask him where he went. Everywhere, he says, looking for you. The night I storm out of our home and he goes searching for me, we've been together for years. I know that he loves me, but when he goes after me, he shows me that he loves me in a way that answers a question I've been asking my whole life. You know what I mean? To be seen and understood and loved in this capacity. So amidst all of this grieving process, after her husband passes, she's also undergoing her own medical issues. Her leg is discolored, and she goes to the doctor and gets diagnosed that she has several blood clots in her legs. And I think after a while it kind of spreads to the rest of her body, so she has to go to the hospital and gets treatments done, and she's literally fighting for her life, because if she doesn't get these treatments, then her blood can continue to clot, and that will obviously lead to life-threatening situations. And she was saying that she's I don't really even want to get these operations, but I do it for the people around me to show them that I care about my life. But in reality, I don't really. This is just to prolong me staying alive. so that everyone around me can think that I'm okay. But in reality, like, I don't even want to be doing this. Like, I just want to go. And another interesting thing that she was talking about with her therapist, that she talks about in the book, is she firmly doesn't want to acknowledge that there can be an afterlife. She says, like, there's a before, and she doesn't want to acknowledge that there's an after, because she says if there is an after, then she acknowledges, then, like, she would want to leave immediately, because if there's an after, that means her husband is in the after, and she wants to get to the after as soon as she can to be with him again. She doesn't want to stay in the before anymore. She doesn't want to stay here knowing that she could be with him. So I think just, like, hearing her talk about how she longs to be with her partner, it's like, it's the intensity and the depth of it is just not even close to anything I've ever experienced, aside from, like, the love that I have for my family. Yeah, she has, like, a hospital operation, and after the operation she has to be in recovery, and her mom has to drive her to and from the hospital because she can't, it's like in her leg and she can't drive. And she says, I think about how if he had been here, he would have been so concerned, asking all these questions I would not know how to answer. He would be waiting for me wherever our home was, his dark eyes still and serious, the way they were when he was really worried. He would have fussed as I settled into bed, where I would be for a while. My leg is tender and fragile. My healing requires that it be held straight and not taxed for some time. He would have insisted on taking time off work to care for me. Always, he took care of me. Just the love that they have for each other. And I think, like, the way that she low-key anxious attachment, like, she kind of talks about it throughout the book. And even when they first started dating, she, like, wasn't sure if he liked her. I'm like, that's so real. And she was like, 3 weeks after us dating, like, starting to date, she told him, like, okay, I don't want you seeing anyone else. And he was like, what makes you like, there is nobody else, like, I only want to be with you. She was like, I felt embarrassed for asking him that. I felt embarrassed that, like, I had to show myself in a way where I doubted his love for me, when for him, he wore it on his sleeve the whole time. Like, he was always so sure that it was only her, but she, like, doubted that. And she was, like, embarrassed that she doubted it all when he stood so firm in his love already. And I think also the way that she talks about grief in the context of her other relationships, like her friendships and with her family as well. Like, when she goes out with her friends, she'll, like, do her best to look like she cares about her life and that she's excited to be there and that she's happy, and they'll make comments like, oh, like, you look happier today, or like, it's good to see you doing well. And she's like, I don't know how to tell them that, like, the pain is still so deep and it's still there and I feel it so heavily, but I don't want them to worry about me, so I just smile and I'm like, yeah, like, I'm doing better, yay. When in reality, she's still crying herself to sleep every night, even though it's been already 7 months. Like, that kind of grief and that pain that you feel after losing somebody, like, it doesn't go away that quickly. And as people, like, everyone else can make assumptions and think that it should go away faster, but it just doesn't, and we just don't understand. So she goes to a picnic with 2 of her, like, really good friends from when she was younger, and she says, I know Brayden and Katie love me. I can literally see it in front of me, but I cannot feel it. I cannot get to their love, or maybe it cannot get to me. I keep looking at the sky, which is a cloudless blue bowl, and thinking if I crack open my chest, that's what I will see too. Empty blue. The year I turn 30, he gets into a minor fender bender because he fills the car so full of balloons he cannot see out of his mirrors. At this time, years ago, she's, like, thinking about her late husband. She said, it was snowing, which I hate, but he insists we go outside. It's beautiful, he says. Slow, heavy flakes frost the top of his head. It's cold, I say. When I look at him, I feel tenderness so close to sadness my eyes burn. Something is wrong with me, I tell him. No, he says, nothing is wrong. I don't know how to explain it, but the way that she talks about her emotions and, like, the sadness that she feels, even, and, like, the doubt that she has in her relationship and the love that he has for her, like, I feel that in my relationships too, and I don't know how to explain it, and I don't know why I'm always so sad, and that's something that I was thinking about today on my flight as well. I don't know why I'm always so sad, but it's just, like, a lingering, and I always feel like something's wrong with me, that I don't know how to accept love, and I feel like that's why this book and one that I read previously, Notes on Heartbreak, just really hurt, because it's so raw and I feel so seen in the pages in ways that scare me, because it's so vulnerable to acknowledge like this deep sadness that I have. And there's been many instances where I will just joke about it with friends of like don't you ever just like every once in a while I just like feel like crying, like I just feel so sad and I don't know why, and it comes out of nowhere and I just want to cry. Like, doesn't that happen to you guys? And my friends will be like, no, that is not a normal occurrence for me. And I just have to be like, oh, me neither. That's crazy. Who would ever think that? When in fact, that's very normal for me. So later on, she is part of this artist residency program, and she, as a writer, so she goes and does this program, and she's reflecting a lot about her time there, wanting to share this experience with her late husband, because she was admitted when he was still alive, but because of the pandemic and after his death, she ended up postponing her residency several times. So years later, she has finally decided to do the residency. She had a name tag, and under it said writer. And she was saying at the very beginning of the book too that she had never considered herself a writer, but he was the first to ever recognize that in her, like to see that talent and to see that that yearning to want to pursue writing. She just never saw it for herself. She was previously, and I believe still is, an educator, a teacher, amongst other roles that she had. Just the way that she writes is so poignant. I don't know how to describe it. Close to the end of the book, she says, I cannot believe how much pain we are asked to bear when we are alive. How even if there is a way, no one can show us how to live with it. I feel like that really just summarizes the way that she feels the entirety of this memoir, and the grief that she experiences, and how you just continue to live with it. Like, it just doesn't, in some ways life does get easier because time just passes, but in actuality, like, you're still holding so much of the grief, and you have to acknowledge that grief like every moment of every single day from that moment forward. You can never fully set it aside. It's something that you just genuinely have to carry forever. Like, the way that she writes sometimes is just the way that I kind of sound when I journal, just like very clipped sentences and just very real thoughts. So I really appreciated this writing style and this memoir. I don't really rate memoirs, because how am I supposed to give a star value to somebody's life story and the way that they choose to write about it? But this one was very, very thought-provoking, and I will continue to think about it for a really long time. I already know. Yeah, that was Hereafter by Amy Lynn. Very, very just raw and touching memoir. I would highly recommend reading it if you are in the proper headspace for it, because I did read it on the plane today, and I did spiral for a bit, and I did cry, and I did have to journal for like 40 minutes straight because I was like going through it. And let me know if you have any book recommendations below. How am I supposed to end these videos? I don't even know. Thanks for watching. I'll see you when I see you. I'm gonna go shower. I'm looking so haggard. Ugh. I was in the airport for like half the day today. Bye.